Yeah, I know, right? Fancy stuff. Get to do multi-stream without having to use Chatterino? That's pretty good. Try Chatterino. I don't think I know how to set it up, so maybe one of these days I will. I don't know. Alright, welcome back to Storytime Sundays. We're continuing on with The Last Guardian. It's our story of two lonely mages in one tower. I haven't heard of that before. Oh, and practically forsaken. Yeah. Practically forsaken caretaker. Alright, how's the music? Should I turn it down a little bit more? Haha, here I am. Move me a little bit. Blocking the words. Very good. Yeesh. How's the sound? Is the music too loud? Should I turn it down a bit? I'm going to turn it down just a touch. Her cat's scampering outside my door. Wonderful. Oh, these cats. Anyway. Oop. Wrong thing. Me. Moving me. There we go. There, it doesn't look like I'm hiding so much. Alright, chapter 5, Sands in an Hourglass. That doesn't sound... It's Dragonlance? It's been Dragonlance all along! Especially this part. Okay. Alright. Let's begin. Oh yeah. We'll do a little appeal here. If you're on Twitch, to avoid ads, please consider a follow and hitting notification buttons. And to avoid the ads, you need a subscription because we do have ads. And subscriptions help the stream. Please consider doing that. Especially if you have like Amazon Prime. You've got that one subscription there. Hand it over to me. I'll take good care of it. If you're on YouTube, subscribe. Hit the bell button. And hit that like. So that we get boosted in the algorithm. We're trying to get that page get going here. Alright. I've seen them before, said Khadgar. It was 7 days after the battle in the swamp. With the return to the tower and a day of recovery on Khadgar's part, the young mage's apprenticeship had begun in earnest. The first hour of the day, before breakfast, Khadgar practiced his spells under Medivh's tutelage. From breakfast until lunch, and through lunch until supper, Khadgar would assist the Master Mage with various tasks. These consisted of making notes as Medivh read off numbers, running down to the library to recover this book or that, or merely holding a collection of tools as the Magus worked. Which was what he was doing at this particular moment, when he finally felt comfortable enough with the older mage to tell him what he knew about the ambush. "Seen who before?" replied the mentor, peering through a great lens at his current experiment. On his fingers the Master Mage wore small pointed thimbles ending in infinitely thin needles. He was tuning something that looked like a mechanical bumblebee, which flexed its heavy wings as his needles probed it. "The orcs," said Khadgar. "I've seen the orcs. We fought before." "You didn't mention them when you first arrived," said Medivh absent-mindedly, his fingers dancing in odd precision, lancing the needles into and out of the device. "I remember asking you about other races. There was no mention. Where have you seen them?" "In a vision, as soon as I arrived here," Khadgar said. "Ah, you had a vision. Well, many get them here, you know. Moreau's probably told you. He's a bit of a blabbermouth, you know." "I had one, maybe two. One I am sure about was on a battlefield. And these creatures, these orcs, were there, attacking us. I mean, attacking the humans I was with." Said Medivh, the tip of his tongue appearing beneath his mustache as he moved the needles delicately along the bumblebee's copper thorax. "And I wasn't here," continued Khadgar. "Not in Azeroth or Lordaeron. Wherever I was, the sky was red as blood." Medivh bristled as if struck by electric shock. The intricate device beneath his tools flashed brightly as the wrong parts were touched, then screamed, and then died. "Red skies," he said, turning away from the workbench and looking sharply at Khadgar. Energy, intense and uncaring, seemed to dance along the older man's dark brows, and the Magus's eyes were the green of a storm-tossed sea. "Red, like blood," said Khadgar. The young man had thought he was becoming used to Medivh's sudden and mercurial moods, but this struck him with the force of a blow. The older mage let out a hiss. "Tell me about it. The world, the orcs, the skies," commanded Medivh, his voice like stone. "Tell me everything." Khadgar recounted the vision of his first night there, mentioning everything he could remember. Medivh interrupted constantly. What were the orcs wearing? What was the world like? What was in the sky, on the horizon? Were there any banners among the orcs? Khadgar felt his thoughts were being dissected and examined. Medivh pulled the information from Khadgar effortlessly. Khadgar told him everything. Everything except the strange, familiar eyes of the warrior mage commander. He did not feel right mentioning that, and Medivh's questions seemed to concentrate more on the red-skied world and the orcs than the human defenders. As he described the vision, the older mage seemed to calm down, but the choppy sea still remained beneath his bushy brows. Khadgar saw no need to upset the Magus further. "Curious," said Medivh, slowly and thoughtfully, after Khadgar had finished. The Master Mage leaned back in his chair and tapped a needle-tipped finger to his lips. There was a silence that hung over the room like a shroud. At last he said, "That is a new one. Very new one indeed." "Sir," began Khadgar. "Medivh," reminded the Master Mage. "Medivh, sir," began Khadgar again. "Where do these visions come from? Are they hauntings of some past or portents of the future?" "Both," said Medivh, leaning back in his chair. "And neither. Go fetch an oar of wine from the kitchen. My work is done for the day, I'm afraid. It's nearly time for supper, and this may take some explaining." When Khadgar returned, Medivh had started a fire in the hearth and was already settling into one of the larger chairs. He held out a pair of mugs. Khadgar poured, the sweet smell of the red wine mixing with the cedar smoke. "Do you drink?" asked Medivh as an afterthought. "A bit," said Khadgar. "It is customary to serve wine with dinner in the Violet Citadel." "Yes," said Medivh. "You wouldn't need to if you just got rid of the lead lining for your aqueduct." Now, you were asking about visions. Yes, I saw what I described to you, and Morose. Khadgar hesitated for a moment, hoping not to further blacken the Castellan's reputation for gossip, then decided to press on. Morose said that I was not alone. The people saw things like that all the time. Morose is right, said Medivh, taking a long pull from the wine and smacking his lips. A light-hearted vintage, not bad at all. That this tower is a place of power should not surprise you. Mages gravitate toward such places. Such places are often where the universe wears thin, allowing it to double back on itself, or perhaps even allowing entry to the twisting nether and to other worlds entirely. Was that what I saw then? Interrupted Khadgar. Another world? Medivh held up a hand to hush the younger man. I am just saying that there are places of power which, for one reason or another, become the seats of great power. One such location is here, in the Red Ridge Mountains. Once long ago, something powerful exploded here, carving out the valley and weakening the reality around it. And that's why you sought it out, prompted Khadgar. Medivh shook his head, but instead said, That's one theory. You said there was an explosion long ago that created this place, and it made it a place of magical power. You then came. Yes, said Medivh. That's all true, if you look at it in a linear fashion. But what happens if the explosion occurred because I would eventually come here, and the place needed to be ready for me? Khadgar's face knitted. But things don't happen like that. In the normal world, no, they do not, said Medivh. But magic is the art of circumventing the normal. That's why the philosophical debates in the halls of the Kirin Tor are so much buffle and blow. They seek to place rationality upon the world and regulate its motions. The stars march in order across the sky. The seasons fall one after the other with lockstep regularity, and men and women live and die. If that does not happen, it's magic, the first warping of the universe, a few floorboards that are bent out of shape, waiting for industrious hands to pry them up. But for that to happen to the area to be prepared for you, started Khadgar. The world would have to be very different than it seems, answered Medivh. Which it truly is, after all. How does time work? Khadgar was not thrown as much by Medivh's apparent change of topics. Time? We use it, trust it, measure by it. But what is it? Medivh was smiling over the top of his cup. Time is a regular progression of instants, like sands through the hourglass, said Khadgar. Excellent analogy, said Medivh. One I was going to use myself and then compare the hourglass with the mechanical clock. You see the difference between the two? Khadgar shook his head slowly as Medivh sipped on his wine. Eventually the mage spoke. No, you're not daft, boy. It's a hard concept to wrap your brain around. The clock is a mechanical simulation of time, each beat controlled by a turning of the gears. You can look at a clock and know that everything advances by one tick of the wheel, one slip of the gears. You know what's coming next, because the original clockmaster built it that way. All right, said Khadgar. Time is a clock. Ah, but time is also an hourglass, said the older mage, reaching for one planted on the mantel and flipping it over. Khadgar looked at the timepiece and tried to remember if it was there before he had brought up the wine or even before Medivh reached for it. The hourglass also measures time, true? Said Medivh. Yet here you never know which particle of sand will move from the upper half to the lower half at any instant. Were you to number the sands, the order would be slightly different each time, but the end result is always the same. All the sand has moved from the top to the bottom. What order it happens in does not matter. The old man's eyes brightened for a moment. So, he asked. So, said Khadgar, you're saying that it may not matter if you set up your tower here because an explosion created this valley and warped the nature of reality around it, or that the explosion occurred because you would eventually come here, and the nature of the universe needed to give you the tools you wanted to stay. Close enough, said Medivh. So what these visions are, then, are bits of sand, said Khadgar. Medivh frowned slightly, but the youth pressed on. If the tower is an hourglass and not a clock, then there are bits of sand, of time itself, that are moving through it at any time. These are unstuck or overlap each other so that we can see them, but not clearly. Some of it's parts of the past. Some of it is parts of the future. Could some of it be of other worlds as well? Medivh now was thinking deeply to himself. It is possible. Full marks. Well thought out. The big thing to remember is that these visions are just that. Visions. They waft in and out. Were the tower a clock, they would move regularly and be easily explained. But since the tower is an hourglass, then they don't. They move at their own speed and defy us to explain their chaotic nature. Medivh leaned back in his chair. Which I, for one, am quite comfortable with. I could never really favor an orderly, well-planned universe. I gotta highlight that. Hang on a second. Boop. That's interesting. Khadgar added, but have you ever sought out a particular vision? Wouldn't there be a way to discover a certain future and then make sure it happened? Medivh's mood darkened. Or make sure it never comes to pass, he said. No, there are some things that even a master mage respects and stays clear of. This is one of them. But no buts, said Medivh, rising and setting his empty mug on the mantelpiece. Now that you've had a bit of wine, let's see how that affects your magical control. Levitate my mug. Khadgar furrowed his brow and realized that his voice had been slightly slurred. But we've been drinking. Exactly, said the Master Mage. You will never know what sands the universe will throw in your face. You can either plan to be eternally vigilant and ready, eschewing life as we know it, or be willing to enjoy life and pay the price. Now, try to levitate the mug. Khadgar didn't realize until this moment how much he had drunk, and tried to clear the mushiness from his head, from his mind, and lift the heavy ceramic mug from the mantel. A few moments later, he was heading for the kitchen, looking for a broom and pan. In the evenings, Khadgar's time was his own, to practice and research, as Medivh dealt with other matters. Khadgar wondered what other matters were, but assumed they include correspondence. For twice a week, a dwarf on Griffinback arrived at the topmost tower with a satchel and left with a larger satchel. Medivh gave the young man free license in the library to research as he saw fit, including the myriad questions that his former masters in the Violet Citadel had requested. My only demand, said Medivh with a smile, is that you show me what you write before you send it to them. Khadgar must have shown his embarrassment because Medivh added, Not because I fear you'll keep something from me, young trust, but because I'd hate for them to know something that I had forgotten about. So Khadgar plunged into the books. For Guzba, he found an ancient, well-read scroll with an epic poem its numbered stanzas precisely detailing a battle between Medivh's mother Egwin and an unnamed demon. For Lady Delth, he made a listing of the mouldering elven tomes in the library, and for Alonda, he plunged through those bestiaries he could read, but could not push the number of troll species past 4. Khadgar also spent his free time with his lockpicks and his personal opening spells. He still sought to master those books that foiled his earlier attempts to crack them open. These tomes had strong magics on them, and he could spend an evening among his divinations before getting even the first hint of what style of spell protected its contents. Lastly, there was the subject of the Guardian. Medivh had mentioned it, and Lord Lothar had assumed that the Magus had confided it to the young man, and backed off quickly when the king's champion had found it not to be the case. The Guardian, it seemed, was a phantom, no more or no less real than the time-skewed visions that seemed to move through the tower. There was a mention in passing of a guardian, always capitalized in this elven tome, a reference in the Azeroth royal histories of a guardian attending this wedding or that funeral, or being in the vanguard of some attack. Always present but never identified. Was this guardian a position, or, like Medivh's supposed near-immortal mother, a single being? There were other phantoms that orbited this guardian as well, an order of some sort, an organization. Was the guardian a holy knight? And the word Tirisfal was written in the margins of one grimoire and then erased, such that only Khadgar's skill at examination told him what was once written there by the carving the pen had done in the parchment. A name of a particular guardian, or the organization, or something else entirely. It was the evening that Khadgar found this word, 4 days after the incident with the mug, that the young man fell into a new vision. Or rather, a vision snuck up on him and surrounded him, swallowing him whole. It was the smell that came to him first, a soft vegetable warmth among the moldering texts, a fragrance that slowly rose into the room. The heat rose in the room, not uncomfortably, but as a warm, damp blanket. The walls darkened and turned green, and vines trellised up the sides of the bookcases, passing through and replacing the volumes that were there and spreading wide, flat leaves. Large pale moonflowers and crimson star orchids sprouted among the stacked scrolls. Khadgar took a deep breath, but more from anticipation than fear. This was not the world of harsh land and orc armies that he had seen before. This was something different. This was a jungle, but it was a jungle on this world. The thought comforted him. And the table disappeared, and the book, and Khadgar was left sitting at a campfire with 3 other young men. They seemed to be about his age and were on some sort of expedition. Sleeping rolls had been laid out, and the stew pot, empty and already cleaned, was drying by the fire. All 3 were dressed for riding, but their clothes were well-tailored and of good quality. The 3 men were laughing and joking, though, as before, Khadgar could not make out the exact words. The blonde one in the middle was in the midst of telling a story, and from his hand motions, one involving a nicely apportioned young woman. The one on his right laughed and slapped a knee as the blonde one continued his tale. This one ran his fingers through his hair, and Khadgar noticed that his dark hair was already receding. That was when he realized he was looking at Lord Lothar. The eyes and nose were his, and the smile just the same. But the flesh was not yet weathered, and his beard was not graying. But it was him. Khadgar looked at the 3rd man and knew at once it had to be Medivh. This one was dressed in a dark green hunter's garb, his hood pulled back to reveal a young, mirthful face. His eyes were burnished jade in the light of the campfire, and he favored the blonde one's story with an embarrassed smile. The blonde one in the center made a point and motion to the young Medivh, who shrugged, clearly embarrassed. The blonde one's story apparently involved the future Magus as well. The blonde one had to be Lane, now King Lane of Azeroth. Yes, the early stories of the three of them had found their way even into the Violet Citadel's archives. The three of them often wandered through the borders of the kingdom, exploring and putting down all manners of raiders and monsters. Lane concluded his story, and Lothar nearly fell back over the log he was sitting upon, roaring with laughter. Medivh suppressed a laugh himself into a curled hand, looking like he was merely clearing his throat. Lothar's laughter subsided, and Medivh said something, opening his palms upward to make a point. Lothar did pitch backward now, and Lane himself put his face in his hand, his body heaving in amusement. Apparently, whatever Medivh said topped Lane's story entirely. Then something moved in the surrounding jungle. The three stopped their revelry at once. They must have heard it. Khadgar, the ghost at this gathering, felt it instead, something malevolent lurking at the borders of the campfire. Lothar rose slowly and reached for a great wide-bladed sword laying in its sheath at his feet. Lane stood up, reaching behind his log to pull out a double-headed axe, and motioned for Lothar to go one way, Medivh to go the other. Medivh had risen as well by this point, and though his hands were empty, he, even at this age, was the most powerful of the three. Lane, with his broad axe, loped forward to one side of the campsite. He might have imagined himself as stealthy, but Khadgar saw him move with firm-footed deliberation. He wanted whatever was there at the edge to reveal itself. The thing obliged, bursting from its place of concealment. It was half again as tall as any of the young men, and for one instant he thought it was some gigantic orc. Then he recognized it from the bestiaries that Alonda had him peruse. It was a troll, one of the jungle breed, its blue-hued skin pale in the moonlight, its long gray hair lacquered upright into a crest that ran from its forehead back to the nape of his neck. Like the orcs, it had fangs jutting from its lower jaw, but these were rounded, peg-like tusks, thicker than the sharp teeth of the orcs. Its ears and nose were elongated, parodies of human flesh. It was dressed in skins, and chains made of human finger bones danced on its bare chest. The troll let out a battle roar, baring its teeth and its chest in rage, and feinted with its spear. Lane swung at the outthrust weapon, but his blow went wide. Lothar charged from one side, and Medivh came up as well, eldritch energy dancing off his fingertips. The troll sidestepped Lothar's great sword, and danced back another step when Lane shredded the air with his huge axe. Each step covered more than a yard, and the two warriors pressed the troll each time it retreated. It used the spear more as a shield than a weapon, holding the haft two-handed and knocking aside the blows. Khadgar realized the creature wasn't fighting to kill the humans, not yet. It was trying to pull them into position. In the vision, the young Medivh must have realized the same thing because he shouted something to the others. But by this time it was too late, for two other trolls chose that moment to leap from their hiding places on either side of the combat. Lane, for all his planning, was the one caught by surprise, and the spear skewered his right arm. The broad axe blade bit into the earth as the future king screamed a curse. The other two concentrated on Lothar, and now the warrior was being forced back, using his broad blade with consummate dexterity, foiling first one thrust then the other. Still, the jungle trolls showed their energy. They were driving the two warriors apart, separating Lane from Lothar, forcing Medivh to choose. Medivh chose Lane. From his phantom viewpoint, Khadgar guessed it was because Lane was already wounded. Medivh charged, his hands flaming, and caught the butt end of the troll's spear in the face, as the troll slammed the heavy haft against Medivh's jaw, then turned and with one elegant motion pummeled the wounded Lane. Medivh went down, and so did Lane, and the axe spun out of the future sovereign's hand. The troll hesitated a moment, trying to determine who to kill first. It chose Medivh, sprawled on the ground at his feet, the closer of the two. The troll raised the spear, and the obsidian point glowed evil in the moonlight. The young Medivh choked off a series of syllables. A small tornado of dust rose from the ground and flung itself into the troll's face, blinding it. The troll hesitated for a moment and clawed at the dusty orbs with one hand. The hesitation was all Medivh needed, for he lunged forward, not with a spell, but with a simple knife, plunging it into the back of the troll's thigh. The troll gave a scream in the night, stabbing blindly. The spear dug into where Medivh had been, for the young mage had rolled to one side and was now rising, his fingertips crackling. He muttered a word, and a lightning gathered in a ball between his fingers and lanced forward. The troll jolted from the shock and hung for a moment, caught in a blue-limbed seizure. The creature fell to its knees, and even then it was not done, for it tried to rise, its rheumy red eyes burning with hatred for the wizard. The troll never got its chance, for a shadow rose behind it, and Lane's recovered axe gleamed briefly in the moonlight before coming down on the troll's head, bisecting it at the neck. The creature sprawled forward, and the two young men, as well as Khadgar, turned to the trolls battling with Lothar. The future champion was holding his own, but just barely, and had backed almost across the entire campsite. The trolls had heard the death scream of their brother, and one continued to press his attack as the other charged back to deal with the two humans. It let out an inarticulate bellow as it crossed the campsite, its spear before it like a knight on horseback. Lane charged in return, but at the last moment veered to one side, dancing aside the spear point. The troll took 2 more steps forward, which brought him up to the campfire itself, where Medivh was waiting. Now the mage seemed to be full of energy, and limned by the coals before him looked demonic in his demeanor. He had his arms wide, and he was chanting something harsh and rhythmic. And the fire itself leaped up, taking a brief animated form of a giant lion, and leaped on the attacking troll. The jungle troll screamed as the coals, logs, and ash wrapped itself around him like a cloak, and would not be shrugged off. The troll flung itself on the ground and rolled, first one way and the other, trying to dampen the flame, but it did no good. Finally, the troll stopped moving entirely, and the hungry flames consumed it. For his part, Lane continued his charge and buried his axe in the side of the surviving troll. The beast let out a howl, but in its moment's hesitation was all that Lothar needed. The champion batted away the outthrust spear with a backhanded blow, then with a leveled, precise swing cut the troll's head clean from its shoulders. The head bounced into the brush and was lost. Lane, though bleeding from his own wound, slapped Lothar in the back, apparently taunting him for taking so long with his troll. Then Lothar put a hand to Lane's chest to quiet him and pointed at Medivh. The young mage was still standing over the fire, his hands held open, but fingers hooked like claws. His eyes were glassy in the surviving firelight, and his jaw was tightly clenched. As the two men and the phantom Khadgar ran over to him, the young man pitched backward. By the time the pair reached Medivh, he was breathing heavily, and his pupils were wide in the moonlight. Warriors and vision visitor leaned over him as the young mage strained to push the words out of his mouth. Watch out for me, he said, looking at neither Lane nor Lothar, but at Khadgar. Then the young Medivh's eyes rolled up in his head and he laid very still. Lothar and Lane were trying to revive their friend, but Khadgar just stepped back. Had Medivh truly seen him as the other mage, the one with his eyes on the war-swept plains had? And he had heard him, clear words spoken almost to the depth of his soul. Khadgar turned and the vision dropped away as quickly as a magician's curtain. He was back in the library again, and he almost stumbled into Medivh himself. Young Trust, said Medivh, the version much older than the one laying on the ground in the vanished vision. Are you all right? I called out, but you did not answer. Sorry, sir, said Khadgar, taking a deep breath. It was a vision. I was lost in it, I'm afraid. Medivh's dark brows grew together. Not more orcs and red skies? He asked seriously, and Khadgar saw a touch of the storm in those green eyes. Khadgar shook his head and chose his words carefully. Trolls. Blue trolls, and it was a jungle. I think it was this world. Sky was the same. Medivh's concern deflated, and he just said, Jungle trolls. I met some once down south in Stranglethorn Vale. The mage's features softened, and as he himself seemed to become lost in a vision of his own. Then he shook his head. But no orcs this time, right? You are sure? No, sir, said Khadgar. You did not want to mention that it was that battle he was witnessing. Was it a bad memory for Medivh? Was this the time when he slipped into the coma? Looking at the older mage, Khadgar could see much of the young man from the vision. He was taller, but slightly stooped from his years and researches, yet there was the young man wrapped within the older form. Medivh, for his part, said, Do you have Song of Eglin? Khadgar shook himself out of his thoughts. The song? Of my mother, said Medivh. It would be an old scroll. I swear I can't find anything here since you cleaned. It is with the other epic poetry, sir, said Khadgar. You should tell him about the vision, he thought. Was this a random event, or was it brought on by his meeting of Lothar? Was finding out about things triggering visions? Medivh crossed to the shelf and, running a finger along the scrolls, pulled the needed version, old and well-worn. He unwound it partway, checking it against the scrap of paper in his pocket, then rewound and replaced it. I have to go, he said suddenly. Tonight, I'm afraid. Where are we going? Asked Khadgar. I go alone this time, said the elder mage, already striding toward the door. I will leave instructions for your studies with Morose. When will you return? Shouted Khadgar after his retreating form. When I am back, bellowed Medivh, taking the stairs up 2 at a time already. Khadgar imagined the Castellan already at the top of the tower, with his runic whistle and tame griffin at the ready. Fine, said Khadgar, looking at the books. I'll just sit here and figure out how to tame an hourglass. I'll break for me. Okay. So one of the things to remember is that when they say that King Lane is the king of Azeroth, Warcraft 1, Stormwind was not Stormwind. It was called Azeroth. So, the southern kingdoms were originally called Azeroth instead of Stormwind. Um, yeah, it does sound weird because we're dealing with contents that have to deal with Warcraft 1. And if you haven't played it, you don't understand these things. But eventually, as they built out the world, then they called the world Azeroth. And then there was, once we got to Warcraft 3, then we knew of Kalimdor. And eventually we got the name of Stormwind. But originally it's Azeroth. But as they built out from there, it became the world was called Azeroth. The original continent is Kalimdor. After the Well of Eternity was destroyed and we had the Sundering, then where the Night Elves ended up was called Kalimdor. And when they threw out the magic users that still remained among the Night Elf clan, and they said you can either leave or die, they sailed across and found what we know as the Eastern Kingdoms, but it would be called I think it would be called Azeroth too. I think that also the continent was called Azeroth too. But yeah, Stormwind was originally called Azeroth in Warcraft 1 because we only saw that little tiny area for the first orc invasion. So hopefully that helps. I like the way they explain about how timey-wimey things work. So the veil was already exploded because it would happen later on. It's, you know, things happen weirdly around there. It's a point where a lot of ley lines converge into one spot. This is where Egwene set up shop. That was her own private tower, and then she gave it to her son. Just like what is it called? The Oculus. That's another place where there's a major shunting of ley lines converging in one spot. But under Karazhan, there's another one there. That's why everything goes weird. And part of it is also because of Medivh. Alright. I think that's all the explaining I needed to do. Okay. Chapter 6. Egwene and Sargeras. Medivh was gone a week, all told, and it was a week well spent for Khadgar. He installed himself in the library and had Morose bring his meals there. On more than one occasion, he did not even reach his quarters in the evening, rather spending the time sleeping on the great library tables themselves. Ultimately, he was searching for visions. His own correspondence went unanswered as he plumbed the ancient tomes and grimoires on questions about time, light, and magic. His early reports had drawn quick responses from the mages of the Violet Citadel. Guzba wanted a transcription of the epic poem of Egwene. Lady Delth declared that she recognized none of these titles he sent her. Could he send them again, this time with the first paragraph of each, so she knew what they were? And Alunda was adamant that there had to be a fifth breed of troll, and that Khadgar had obviously not found the proper bestiaries. The young mage was delighted to leave their demands unanswered as he sought out a way of taming the visions. I will be too, if everybody's going off and this ain't it. You can go look for another one. Well, then you can go and sit and wait. I don't blame him. The key to his incantation, it seemed, would be a simple spell of far-seeing, a divination that granted sight of distant objects in far-off locations. A book of priestly magic had described it as an incantation of holy vision, yet it worked as well for Khadgar as it did for their clerics. While that priestly spell functioned over space, perhaps with modification it could function over time. Khadgar reasoned that this would normally be impossible given the flow of time in a determinate clockwork universe. But it seemed that within the walls of Karazhan, at least, time was an hourglass, and identifying bits of disjointed time was more likely. And once one hooked into one grain of time, it would be easier to move that grain to another. If others had attempted this within the walls of Medivh's tower, there was no clue within the library, unless it was within the most heavily guarded or unreadable of the tomes located on the iron balcony. Curiously, the notes in Medivh's own hands were uninterested in the visions, which seemed to dominate other notes from other visitors. Did Medivh keep that information in another location, or was he truly more interested in matters beyond the walls of the citadel than the activities within it? Refitting a spell for a new activity was not as simple as changing an incantation here, altering a motion there. It required a deep and precise understanding of how divination worked, of what it revealed and how. When a hand motion changes or the type of incense used is deleted, the result is most likely complete failure, where the energies are dissipated harmlessly. Occasionally, the energies may go wild and out of control, but usually the only result of a failed spell is a frustrated spellcaster. In his studies, Khadgar discovered that if a spell fails in a spectacular fashion, it indicates that the failed spell is very close to the final intended spell. The magics are trying to close the gap to make things happen, though not always with the results intended by the caster. Of course, sometimes these failed magic users did not survive the experience. During the process, Khadgar was afraid that Medivh would return at any time, wafting back into the library, looking for the well-read epic poem or some other bit of trivia. Would he tell his master what he was trying? And if he did, would Medivh encourage him or forbid him from trying to find out? After 5 days, Khadgar felt he had the spell-making complete. The framework remained that of the far-seeing, but it was now empowered with a random factor to allow it to reach through and search out the discontinuities that seemed to exist within the tower. These bits of misplaced time would be a little brighter, a little hotter, or simply a little odder than the immediate surroundings, and as such attract the full force of the spell itself. The spell, if it functioned, should in addition tune in to the vision better. This would collect the sounds at the other end and remove the distortion, concentrating them in the same fashion as an elderly person cupping a hand to the ear to hear better. It would not work for sounds beyond the central location as well, but should clarify what individuals were saying in addition to what the caster was seeing. The evening of the 5th day, Khadgar had completed his calculations, the neat rows and orders of powers and casting laid out in a simple script. Should something go horribly wrong, at least Medivh would figure out what had happened. Medivh, of course, kept a fully equipped pantry of spell components, including a larder of aromatic and thaumaturgic herbs, and a lapidarium of crushed semi-precious stones. Of these, Khadgar chose amethyst to lay out his magic circle in the library itself, crisscrossing it with runes of powdered rose quartz. He reviewed the words of power, most of them known to the young mage before he left Dalaran. and worked through the motions, almost all of them original. Dressed in conjuration robes, more for luck than effect, he stepped within the casting circle. Khadgar let his mind settle and become calm. This was no quickly cast battle spell or some offhand cantrip. Rather, this was a deep and powerful spell, one that, if within the Violet Citadel, would set off the warning abjurations of other mages and bring them flying to him. He took a deep breath and began to cast. Within his mind, the spell began to form, a warm hot ball of energy. He could feel it congeal within him as rainbow ripples moved across the surface. This was the core of the spell, usually quickly dispatched to alter the real world as its caster saw fit. Khadgar fitted the spear with the attributes he desired, to seek out the bits of time that seemed to haunt the tower, sort through them, and bring together a single vision, one that he could witness spread before him. The ideas seemed to sync with the imaginary sphere in his mind, and in return the sphere seemed to hum at a higher pitch, awaiting only release and direction. "Bring me a vision," said the young mage. "Bring me a vision of the young Medivh." With the sound of an egg imploding, the magic was gone from his mind, seeping into the real world to carry out his bidding. There was a rush of air, and as Khadgar looked around, the library began to transform, as it had before, the vision moving slowly in his space and time. Only when it suddenly got colder did Khadgar realize he had called up the wrong vision. It moved through the library suddenly, a cold draft as if someone had left the window open. The breeze went from a draft to a chill to an arctic blast, and despite his own knowledge that it was merely illusion, Khadgar shivered to his core. The walls of the library fell away as the vision took hold with an expanse of white. The chill wind curled around the books and manuscripts and left a blanket of snow as it passed, thick and hard. Tables, shelves, and chairs were obscured and then eliminated with the swirls of thick, heavy flakes. And Khadgar was on a hillside, his feet disappearing at his knees into a bank of snow, but leaving no mark. He was a ghost within this vision. Still, his breath frosted and curled upwards as he looked about him. To his right was a copse of trees, dark evergreens loaded down by the passing snowstorm. Far to his left was a great white cliff. Khadgar thought it some chalky substance, and then realized that it was ice, as if someone had taken a frozen river and uprooted it. The ice river was as tall as some of the mountains on Dalaran, and small dark shapes moved above it. Hawks or eagles, though they would have to be of immense size if they were truly near the icy cliffs. Ahead of him was a vale, and moving up the vale was an army. The army melted the snow as it passed, leaving a smudged mark of black behind it like a slug's trail. The members of the army were dressed in red, wearing great horned helms and long, high-backed black cloaks. They were hunters, for they wore all manners of weapons. At the head of the army, its leader bore a standard, and on top of the standard rose a dripping, decapitated head. Khadgar thought it some great green-scaled beast, but stopped himself when he realized it was a dragon's head. He had seen a skull of such a creature in the Violet Citadel, but never thought that he would see one that had recently been alive. How far back had his vision truly thrown him? The army of giant things were bellowing what could have been a marching song, though it could have just as easily been a string of curses or a challenging cry. The voices were muddled, as if they were at the bottom of a great well, but at least Khadgar could hear them. As they drew closer, Khadgar realized what they were. Their ornate helmets were not helms, but rather horns that jutted from their own flesh. Their cloaks were not garments, but great black-like wings that jutted from their backs. The red-tinged armor was their own thick flesh, glowing from within and melting the snow. They were demons, creatures from Guzba's lectures and Corrigan's hidden pamphlets, monstrous beings that exceeded even the orcs in their bloodthirst and sadism. The great broad-bladed swords were clearly bathed in crimson, and now Khadgar could see that their bodies were spattered with gore as well. They were here, wherever and whenever here was, and they were hunting dragons. There was a soft, distorted sound behind him, no more than a footfall on a soft carpet. Khadgar turned, and he realized he was not alone on the hillock overlooking the demon-hunting party. She had come up from behind him unawares, and as she saw him, she paid him no mind. Just as the demons seemed a blight incarnate on the land, so too did she radiate her own sense of power. This was a brilliant power that seemed to fold and intensify as she glided along on top of the surface of the snow itself. She was real, but her white leather boots left only the faintest marks in the snow. She was tall and powerful, and unafraid of the abomination in the valley below. Her garb was as white and unspoiled as the snow around them, and she wore a vest made of small silver scales. A great white hooded fur cape with a lining of green silk billowed behind her, held at her throat by a large green stone which matched her eyes. She wore her blonde hair simply, held in place by a silver diadem, and seemed less affected by the cold than the ghostly Khadgar. Yet it was her eyes that held his attention, green as summer forest, green as polished jade, green as the ocean after a storm. Khadgar recognized those eyes, for he had felt the penetrating gaze of similar eyes, but from her own son. This was Egwene, Medivh's mother, the powerful, near-immortal mage that was so old as to become a legend. Khadgar also realized where he must be, and this was Egwene's battle against the demon hordes, a legend saved only in fragments, in the cantos of an epic poem on the library shelf. With a pang, Khadgar realized where his spell had gone wrong. Medivh had asked for that scroll before leaving, the last time Khadgar had seen him. Had the spell misfired, passing through a vision of Medivh himself most recently into the very legend that he was checking. Egwene frowned as she looked down on the demonic hunting party, the single line dividing her eyebrows showing her displeasure. Her jade eyes flashed, and Khadgar could guess that a storm of power was brewing within her. It did not take long for that anger to be released. She raised an arm, chanted a short clipped phrase, and lightning danced from her fingertips. This was no mere conjurer's bolt, nor even the harshest strike of a summer thunderstorm. This was a shard of elemental lightning, arcing through the cold air and finding its ground in the surprised demonic armor. The air split down to its most basic elements as the bolt cleaved through it, and the air smelled sharp and bitter in its passing, the air thundering in to replace the space the bolt had briefly filled. Despite himself, despite noting that he was a phantom, despite knowing that this was a vision, despite all this, and the fact that the noise was muted by his ghostly state, Khadgar grimaced and recoiled at the flash and metallic tolling of the mystic bolt. The bolt struck the standard bearer, the one bearing the severed head of the great green dragon. It immolated the demon where he stood, and those around it were blasted from their feet, falling like hot coals in the snow. Some did not rise again. But the majority of the hunting party were outside the spell's effect, whether by accident or design. The demons, each one larger than 10 men, recoiled in shock, but that lasted only a moment. The largest of them bellowed something in a language that sounded like broken metal bells, and half of the demons took wing, charging Egwin's and Kagar's position. The other half pulled out heavy bows of black oak and iron arrows. As they fired the arrows, they ignited, and a rain of fire descended upon them. Egwin did not flinch, but merely raised a hand in a sweeping motion. The entire sky between her and the fiery rain erupted in a wall of bluish flame, which swallowed the orange-red bulbs as if they had simply fallen into a river. Yet the bolts were merely to provide cover for the attackers, who burst through the blue wall of fire as it dissipated and dropped on Egwin from above. There had to be at least 20 of them, each a giant, darkening the skies with their huge wings. Khadgar looked at Egwin and saw that she was smiling. It was a knowing, self-confident smile, and one that the young mage had seen on Medivh's face when they had fought the orcs. She was more than confident. Khadgar looked down the valley to where the archers had been. They had abandoned their useless missiles, but now were gathered together, chanting in a low, buzzing tone. The air warped around them, and a hole appeared in reality, a dark malignancy against the pristine white. And from that hole dropped more demons, creatures of every description, with the heads of animals, with flaming eyes, with wings of bats and insects and great scavenging birds. These demons joined the choir, and the rift opened farther, sucking more and more of the spawn of the twisting nether into the cold northern air. Egwin paid the chanters and reinforcements no mind, but rather coolly concentrated on those dropping on her from above. She passed her hand palm up. Half of those that flew were turned to glass, and all of them were knocked from the sky. Those that had been turned to crystal shattered where they struck with discordant chords. Those that were still living landed with a heavy thump and rose again, their ichor-splatted weapons drawn. There were 10 left. Egwin placed her left fist against her upright right palm. The 4 of the survivors melted, their ruddy flesh melting off the bones as they slumped into the snowbanks. They screamed until their decaying throats filled with their own desiccated flesh. There were 6 left. Egwin clutched the air, and 3 more demons exploded as their interiors turned into insects and ripped them from the inside out. They didn't even have time to scream as their forms were replaced by swarms of gnats, bees, and wasps, which boiled out towards the forests. There were 3 left. Egwin pulled her hands apart, and a demon had its arms and legs ripped from its torso by invisible hands. 2 left. Egwin raised 2 fingers, and a demon turned to sand, its dying curse lost on the chill breeze. 1 left. It was the largest, the leader, the bellower of orders. At close range, Khadgar could see that its bare chest was a pattern of scars. One eye socket was empty. The other burned with hate. It did not attack. Neither did Egwin. Instead, they stopped, frozen for a moment, while the valley beneath them filled with demons. Finally, the great behemoth of a demon snarled. His voice was clear but distant to Khadgar's ears. "You are a fool, guardian of Tirisfal," it said, wrapping its lips around the uncomfortable human language. Egwin let out a laugh as sharp and as thin as a glass dagger. "Am I, foul spawn? I came here to spoil your dragon hunt. It seems that I have succeeded." "You are an overconfident fool," slurred the demon. "While you have been fighting only a few, my brothers in sorcery have brought in others, a legion of others. Every incubus and petty demon, every nightmare and shadow hound, every dark lord and captain of the Burning Legion. I'll have come here while you have fought these few. I know, said Egwin calmly. You know? Bellowed the demon with a throaty laugh. You know that you are alone in the wilderness, with every demon raised against you? You know? I know, said Egwin, and there was a smile in the voice. I know you would bring as many of your allies as possible. A guardian would be too great a target for you to resist. You know? Shouted the demon again. And you came anyway, alone, to this forsaken place? I know, said Egwin. But I never said I was alone. Egwin snapped her fingers, and the sky suddenly darkened, as if a great flock of birds had been disturbed and blocked the sun. Except they were not birds. They were dragons. More dragons than Khadgar ever imagined existing. They hovered in place on their great wings, waiting for the guardian signal. Foul spawn of the burning legion, said Egwin. It is you that are the fool. The demonic leader let out a cry and raised his blood-spattered sword. Egwin was too quick for it and raised a hand, 3 fingers outstretched. The foul spawn's scar-ridden chest evaporated, leaving only a cloud of bloody motes. His brawny arms fell away to each side, its abandoned legs folded and it collapsed, and its head, registering nothing so much as a look of shocked surprise, fell into the melting snow and was lost. That was the signal for the dragons, for as when they turned on their collected horde of summoned demons, the great flying creatures swooped down from all sides, and flames sprung from their open mouths. The front row of demons were immolated, reduced to no more than ash in an instant, while others struggled to pull out their weapons, to ready their own spells, to flee the field. In the center of the army a chant went up, this one as an intense pleading and an impassioned cry. These were the most powerful of the demonic spellcasters, who concentrated their energies as those at the borders fought off the dragons at deadly cost. The demons regrouped and retaliated, and dragons now began to fall from the sky, their bodies riddled by iron arrows and flaming bolts, by sorcerous poisons and by maddening visions. Still, the circle around the center of the demons shrank as more and more of the dragons took their revenge against the demons for the hunt, and the cries in the center became more desperate and indistinct. Khadgar looked at Egwin, and she was standing still stock in the snow. Sorry, I messed that up. And she was standing stock still in the snow, her fists clenched, her green eyes blazing with power, her teeth locked in a hideous grin. She was chanting too, something dark and inhuman and beyond even Khadgar's ability to recognize. She was fighting the spell the demons had constructed, but she was pulling energy from it as well, bending mystic force contained within back on itself, like layers of steel in a sword's blade are folded back on themselves to make the blade stronger and more potent. The cries of the demons in the center reached a fevered pitch, and now Egwin was shouting herself. A nimbus of energy coalesced around her. Her hair was loose and flying now, and she raised both arms and unleashed the last words of her conjuration. And there was a flash at the center of the demonic horde, at the center where the casters chanted and screamed and prayed. It was a rip in the universe, this time a bright rip, as if a doorway into the sun itself had been opened. The energy spiraled outward, and the demons did not even have time to scream as it overtook them, burning them out and leaving the shadows of their afterimage as their only testament. All of the demons were caught, and a few of the dragons as well who stayed too close to the center of the demonic horde. They were caught like moths in a flame, and snuffed out just as surely. Egwin let out a ragged breath and smiled. It was the smile of the wolf, the predator, of the victor. Where the demonic horde had been, there was now a pillar of smoke, rising to the heavens in a great cloud. But as Khadgar watched, the cloud flattened and gathered in on itself, growing darker and more intense like the anvil of a thunderhead. Yet in redoubling itself, it grew stronger, and its heart grew blacker, verging on shades of purple and ebony. And from out of the darkened clouds, Khadgar saw a god emerge. It was a titanic figure, larger than any giant of myth, greater than any dragon. Its skin looked like it was cast in bronze, and it wore black armor made of molten obsidian. Its great beard and wild hair were made of living flames, and huge horns jutted from above its dark brow. Its eyes were the color of the infinite abyss. It strode out of the dark cloud, and the earth shook where its feet fell. It carried a huge spear engraved with runes that dripped burning blood, and it had a long tail ending in a fireball. What dragons were left fled the field, heading for the dark forest and the distant cliffs. Khadgar could not blame them. As much power as Medivh held within him, as much great power that his mother now showed. It was like two small candles compared to the raw power of this lord of the demons. Sargeras, hissed Egwin. Guardian, thundered the great demon, in a voice as deep as the ocean itself. In the distance, the ice cliffs collapsed rather than echo this hellish voice. The guardian pulled herself up to her full height, brushed back a stray blonde hair, and said, I have broken your toys. You are finished here. Flee while you still have your life. Khadgar looked at the guardian as if she had lost her mind. Even to his eyes, she was exhausted from her experience, almost as empty as Khadgar had been against the orcs. Surely this titanic demon could see through the ruse. The epic poem spoke of Egwin's victory. Was he about to witness her death instead? Sargeras did not laugh, but his voice rolled across the land, pressing down on Khadgar nonetheless. The time of Tirisfal is about to end, said the demon. This world will soon bow before the onslaught of the Legion. Not as long as there is a guardian, said Egwin. Not as long as I live, or those who come after me. Her fingers curled slightly, and Khadgar could see that she was summoning power within herself, gathering her wits, her will, and her energy into one great assault. Despite himself, Khadgar took a step back, then another, then a third. If his elder self could see him in the vision, if young Medivh could see him, could not these two great powers, mage and monster, see him as well? Or was he too small to notice, perhaps? Surrender now, said Sargeras. I have use of your power. No, said Egwin, her hands in tight balls. Then die, guardian, and let your world die with you, said the titanic demon, and raised his bleeding rune spear. Egwin raised both hands and unleashed a shout, half curse and half prayer. A flaming rainbow of colors unseen on this world erupted from her palms, snaking upward like a sentient strike of lightning. It struck like a dagger thrust in the center of Sargeras' chest. It seemed to Khadgar like a bow shot fired against a boat, as small and as ineffective. Yet Sargeras staggered under the blow, taking a half-step backward and dropping his huge spear. It struck the ground like a meteorite hitting the earth, and the snow rippled beneath Khadgar's feet. He fell to one knee, but looked up at the demon lord. When Egwin's spell had struck, there was a darkness spreading. No, not a darkness, but rather a coolness, the heated bronze flesh of the Titan demon dying and being replaced with a cold, inert mass. It radiated from the center of its chest like a wildfire, leaving consumed flesh behind it. Sargeras regarded the growing devastation with surprise, then alarm, then fear. He raised a hand to touch it, and it spread to that limb as well, leaving an inert mass of rough black metal behind. Now Sargeras started chanting himself, pulling together what energies he possessed to reverse the process, to staunch the flow, to put out the consuming fire. His words grew hotter and more passionate, and his unaffected skin flicked with renewed intensity. He was glowing like a sun, shouting curses as the dark coolness reached where his heart should have been. And then there was another flash, this one as intense as the one that consumed the demon horde, centered on Sargeras himself. Khadgar looked away, looked at Egwene, who watched as the fire and darkness consumed her foe. The brightness of the light dimmed the day itself, and long shadows stretched out behind the mage. And then it was over. Khadgar blinked as his eyes regained their sight. He turned back to the veil, and there was the titanic Sargeras, inert as a thing made of wrought iron. The power burned out of him. Beneath his weight, the heated Arctic ground started to give way, and slowly his dead form fell forward, remaining whole as it mashed into the ground. The air around them was still. Egwene laughed. Khadgar looked at her, and she looked drained, both by exhaustion and by madness. She rubbed her hands and chuckled and started to walk down toward the toppled Titan. Khadgar noticed that she no longer rested delicately atop the drifts, but now had to slog her way down the hill. As she left him, the library began to return. The snow began to sublimate in thick clouds of steam, and the shadowy forms of the shelves, the upper gallery, and the chairs slowly made themselves visible. Khadgar turned slightly back toward where the tables should have been, and everything was back to normal. The library reasserted its reality with a firm suddenness. Khadgar let out a chill breath and rubbed his skin. Cool, but not cold. The spell had worked well enough in generalities, if not particulars. It had called the vision, but not the desired one. The question was what went wrong, and what was the best way to fix it. The young mage reached for his scribe's pouch, pulling from it a blank sheet of parchment and tools. He fitted a metal nub to the end of his stylus, melted some of the octopus ink in a bowl, and quickly began to note everything that happened. How he cast the initial spell, to Egwene sinking deeper in the snow as she walked away. He was still working an hour later when there was a cadaverous cough at the doorway. Khadgar was so wrapped up in thought that he did not notice until Morose coughed a second time. Khadgar looked up, mildly irritated. There was something important he was about to write, but it was eluding him. Something that was just at the corner of his mind's eye. "The Magus is back," said Morose. "Wants you up at the observatory level." Khadgar looked at Morose blankly for a moment, before the words gained purchase in his mind. "Medivh's back?" he managed at last. "That's what I said," groaned Morose, each word given grudgingly. "You're to fly to Stormwind with him." "Stormwind? Me? Why?" managed a younger mage. "You're the apprentice, that's why," scowled Morose. "Observatory, top level. I've summoned the griffins." Khadgar looked at his work, line upon line of neat handwriting, delivering into every detail. There was something else he was thinking about. Instead, he said, Yes, let me gather up my things and finish this." "Take your time," said the Castellan. It's only the Magus that wants you to fly with him to Stormwind Castle. Nothing important. And Morose faded back into the hallway. Top level, came his disembodied voice, almost as an afterthought. Stormwind, thought Khadgar. King Lane's castle. What would be important enough for him to have to go there? Perhaps a report of the orcs? Khadgar looked at his writing. With the news that Medivh was back and that they would leave soon, his thoughts were disrupted, and now his mind was on the new task. He looked at the last words he wrote on the parchment. Egwin had 2 shadows, it said. Khadgar shook his head. Whatever course his mind was following was gone now. He carefully blotted the excess ink and made sure it did not smear and set the pages aside. Then he gathered his tools and quickly headed for his quarters. He would have to change into traveling clothes if he was going Griffin back, and would need to pack his good conjuring cloak if he was going to meet royalty. I love Egwin. I find it funny that this story of her fight with Sargeras was the game originally called him Sargeras. Sargeras. It was two syllables instead of 3. A lot of the stories tell it to be like a long epic fight. And this one was just like a zap. And of course they miss out the part where she sealed that bit of Sargeras into the Temple of Elune from Zinashari. No. I don't know how they got Sargeras from Sargeras, but you know. I think that is some kind of old god from even our older civilizations. I know there's a variation of that name in Dragonlance. He is the consort of Takesis. He is worshipped by the Minotaurs of Kryn. Sargonas, I think it was pronounced. Of course, the authors are going to tell me something different, and it's going to make absolutely no sense to me. Anywho. But, yeah, because I was playing this game and reading the books, and I was like, why does the name sound familiar? It's like, oh yeah, that's right, it's a Krynnish god. Could be an older civilization's god too from Earth. I'm pretty sure, but I'm not totally sure. But Egwin having 2 shadows was supposed to be your hint that she was carrying that little sliver of Sargeras within her at that point. But not to be like over obvious that it is. It's just that something's not quite right. But if you know the legends, you know that that's what happened to her. Sargeras didn't come and like it was supposed to be him like completely, but he like threw a spark of himself into her. It's just so that he can use the Guardians as he sees fit for coming back And hint, hint, nudge, nudge, that's what's going to be happening soon. Especially if you saw the movie. Because you can see that part too, but they didn't do the Igwin part. It just showed Khadgar being stuck in a bad situation, and it had something to do with Medivh. Alright, so we're back to calling it Stormwind. I think it was the castle of Stormwind and in the kingdom of Azeroth. I think it's something like that. We'll see how they word it here, because they go back and forth. And I mean, Lane is, well, from the visions, is the future king, and he is the king. So, we'll see how they word this. Alright. Chapter 7, Stormwind. Up until then, the greatest buildings that Khadgar had ever seen had been the Violet Citadel itself, on Cross Island outside the city of Dalaran. The majestic spires and great halls of the Kirin Tor, roofed by thick slate of the color lapis lazuli, which gave the citadel its name, had been a point of pride for Khadgar. In all his travels throughout Lordaeron and into Azeroth, nothing, not even Medivh's tower, came close to the ancient grandeur of the city of the Kirin Tor. We can't go into game and see this because it doesn't exist anymore. It got destroyed. So, I can't. The halls of the Kirin Tor were roofed with dark blue? Interesting. Anywho. Until he came to Stormwind. They had flown through the night as before, and this time the young mage was convinced he had slept while guiding the griffin through the chill night air. Whatever knowledge Medivh had placed in his mind was still operating, for he was sure with his ability to guide the winged predator with his knees, and felt quite at home. The part of his brain where the knowledge resided felt no pain this time, but rather a slight thrumming, like the mental tissue had healed over, leaving scar tissue, taking the knowledge within, but still recognizing it as a separate part of him. He woke as the sun crested the horizon behind him and panicked momentarily, causing the great flyer to bank slightly, dragging it away from following in Medivh's wake. Ahead of him, suddenly and brilliant in the morning sun, was Stormwind. It was a citadel of gold and silver. The walls in the morning light seemed to glow with their own radiance, burnished like a chalice under a castellan's cleaning. The roofs glittered as if crafted from silver, and for a moment Khadgar thought they were set with innumerable small gems. The young mage blinked and shook his head. The golden walls became near stone, though polished to a fine luster in some places, intricately carved in others. The roofs of silver were merely dark slate, and what he thought were gemstones merely collected dew rainbowing back the dawn. And yet Khadgar was still astounded by the city's size, as great, if not greater, than anything in Lordaeron, and seen from this great height, it spread out before him. He counted 3 full sets of walled ribbons around the central keep, and lesser barriers separating different wards. Everywhere he looked, there was more city beneath him. Even now, in the dawn hours, there was activity. Smoke rose from morning fires, and already people were clotting in the open marketplaces and commons. Great wains were lumbered out of the main gates, loaded with farmers heading for the neat, orderly fields that spread out from the city's walls like skirts, stretching almost to the horizon. Khadgar could not identify half the buildings. Great towers could have been universities or granaries, as far as he could tell. A surging river cascade had been harnessed by massive water wheels, but to what purpose he could not guess. There was a sudden flame far to his right, though whether from a foundry, a captive dragon, or some great accident was a mystery. It was the greatest city he had ever seen, and at its heart was Lane's castle. It could be no other. Here the walls seemed to be truly made of gold, set with silver around the windows. The royal roof was shod with blue slate, as deep and luxurious as the sapphires, and from its myriad towers Khadgar could see pennants with the lion's head of Azeroth, the sigil of King Lane's household and symbol of the land. The castle complex seemed to be a small city in itself, with innumerable side buildings, towers, and halls. Arching galleries spanned between buildings at lengths that Khadgar thought impossible without magical aid. Perhaps such a structure could only be crafted with magic, thought Khadgar, and realized that perhaps this was one reason Medivh was so valued here. The older mage raised a hand and circled over one particular tower, its topmost floor a level parapet. Medivh pointed down once, twice, a third time. He wanted Khadgar to land first. Pulling from the scabbed-over memories, Khadgar brought the great griffin down neatly. The great eagle-headed beast churned its wings backward like a great sail, slowing to a delicate landing. There was a delegation already waiting for him. A group of retainers in blue livery surged forward to take the reins and fit the griffin's head with a heavy hood. The alien memories told Khadgar that this was similar to a falconer's snood, restricting the raptor's vision. Another had a bucket of warm cow guts, which were carefully presented before the griffin's snapping beak. Khadgar slipped from the griffin's back and was greeted warmly by Lord Lothar himself. The huge man seemed even larger in an ornate robe and cape, topped with an inscribed breastplate and filigreed mantle hanging on his shoulder. "Apprentice," said Lothar, swallowing Khadgar's hand with his huge meaty paw. "Good to see you're still employed." "My lord," said Khadgar, trying not to wince from the pressure of the larger man's grip. "We flew through the night to get here. I don't..." The rest of Khadgar's statement was swept away in a flurry of wings and the panicked squawk of a griffin. Medivh's mount tumbled out of the sky, and the magus was less graceful in his landing. The huge flyer slid across the width of the turret and almost fell off the other side, and Medivh pulled hard on the reins. As it was, the griffin's great foreclaws clutched at the crenellated wall and almost tipped the older mage over the side. Khadgar did not wait for comment from Lord Lothar, but bolted forward, followed by a host of blue-clad retainers, and Lothar lumbering up behind them. Medivh had already dismounted by the time they had reached him, and handed the reins to the first of the retainers. "Blasted crosswind," said the older mage irritably. "Told you this was precisely the wrong spot for an aviary. But no one listens to the mage around here. Good landing, lad," he added as an afterthought, as the servants swarmed over his griffin, trying to calm it down. "Mad," said Lothar, holding out a hand in greeting. "It is good you could come." Medivh just scowled. "I came as soon as I could," the wizard snapped, responding to some affront that passed Khadgar by entirely. "You have to get along without me sometimes, you know." If Lothar was surprised by Medivh's attitude, he said nothing of it. "Good to see you anyway." "His Majesty will have to wait," finished Medivh. "Take me to the chamber in question, now." "No, I know the way myself. You said it was Hugler and Hungerin. This way, then." And with that, the magus was off, toward the side stairs that spiraled into the tower proper. 5 levels down, then a cross bridge, then 3 levels up. Horrible place for an aviary. Khadgar looked at Lothar. The larger man rubbed his beefy hands over his balding pate, shook his head. Then he started after the man, Khadgar in tow. Medivh was gone by the time they reached the bottom of the spiral. Through a litany of complaints and the occasional curse could be heard up ahead, diminishing fast. "He's in a fine mood," said Lothar. "Let me walk you to the mage chambers. We'll find him there." "He was very agitated last night," said Khadgar by way of apology. "He had been gone, and apparently your summons reached Karazhan shortly after he had returned." "He has told you what this is all about, apprentice," said Lothar. Khadgar had to shake his head. Champion Anduin Lothar frowned deeply. "Two of the greatest sorcerers of Azeroth are dead. Their bodies burned almost beyond recognition. The heart pulled from their very chest. Dead in their chambers. And there is evidence..." Lord Lothar hesitated for a moment, as if trying to choose the right words. "There is evidence of demonic activity, which is why I sent the fastest messenger to fetch the Magus. Perhaps he can tell us what happened." "Where are the bodies?" shouted Medivh, as Lothar and Khadgar finally caught up with him. They were near the top of another of the spires in the castle. The city spread out before them in a great open bay window opposite the door. The room was a shambles, and it looked like it had been searched by orcs, and sloppy orcs at that. Every book had been pulled from the shelves, and every scroll unrolled, and in many cases shredded. Alchemic devices were smashed, powders and poultices scattered about in a fine dusting, and even the furniture broken. In the center of the room was a ring of power, and an inscription carved into the floor itself. The ring was 2 concentric circles, incised with words of power between them. The incisions in the floor were deep and filled with a sticky dark liquid. There were 2 scorch marks on the floor, each man-sized, situated between the circle and the window. Such incised rings had only one purpose to them, as far as Khadgar knew. The librarian in the Violet Citadel was always warning about them. "Where are the bodies?" repeated Medivh, and Khadgar was glad that he was not expected to provide the answers. "Where are the remains of Huglar and Hugarin?" "They were removed soon as they were found," said Lothar calmly. "It was unseemly to leave them here. We didn't know when you would arrive." "You didn't know if I would arrive, you mean," snapped Medivh. All right. We can still salvage something. Who has come into this room?" "The Conjurer Lords Huglar and Hugarin," began Lothar. "Well, of course," said Medivh sharply. "They had to be here if they died here. Who else?" "One of their servants found them," continued Lothar, "and I was called, and I brought several guardsmen to move the bodies. They have not been interred yet, if you wish to examine them." Medivh was already deeply in thought. "The bodies or the guardsmen? No matter, we can take care of that later. So that's a servant, yourself, and about 4 guards, would you say? And now myself and my apprentice. No one else?" "No one I can think of," said Lothar. The Magus closed his eyes and muttered a few words under his breath. Might have been either a curse or a spell. His eyes flew open. "Interesting. Young Trust!" Khadgar took a deep breath. "Lord Magus, I need your youth and inexperience. My jaded eyes may see what I'm expecting to see. I need fresh eyes. Don't be afraid to ask questions now. Come here and stand in the center of the room. No, don't cross the circle itself. We don't know if it has any lingering enchantments on it. Stand here. Now, what do you sense?" "I see the wrecked room," started Khadgar. "I didn't say see. said Medivh sharply. I said sense. Khadgar took a deep breath and cast a minor spell, one that sharpened the senses and helped find lost articles. It was a simple divination, one he had used hundreds of times in the Violet Citadel. It was particularly good for finding things that others wanted to keep hidden. But even upon the first intoned words, Khadgar could feel it was different. There was a sluggishness to the magic in the room. Often magic had a feel of lightness and energy, but this felt more viscous, almost liquid in nature. Khadgar had never felt it before, and wondered if it was because of the circles of power, or powers and cantrips of the light mages themselves. It was a thick feeling, like stale air in a room that had been shuttered for years. Khadgar tried to pull the energies together, but they seemed to resist, to follow his desires with only the greatest reluctance. Khadgar's face grew stern as he tried to pull more of the power in the room, of the magical energies into himself. This was a simple spell. If anything, it should be easier in a place where such castings would be commonplace. And suddenly, the young mage was inundated with the thick, fetid feel of the magic. It was suddenly upon him and surrounding him, as if he had pulled the bottommost stone out and brought down a wall upon himself. The force of the dark, heavy magic fell upon him in a thick blanket, crushing the spell beneath him and driving him physically to his knees. Despite himself, he cried out. Medivh was at his side at once, helping the young mage to his feet. There, there, said the magus. I didn't expect you to succeed even that well. Good try. Excellent work. What is it? Managed Khadgar, suddenly able to breathe again. It was like nothing I felt before. Heavy, resistant, smothering. That's good news for you, then, said Medivh. Good that you sensed it. Good that you carried through. This magic has been particularly twisted here, a remnant of what occurred earlier. You mean like a haunting? Said Khadgar. Even in Karazhan I never... No, not like that, said Medivh. Something much worse. The two dead mages here were summoning demons. It's that taint that you feel here, that heaviness of magic. A demon was here. That is what killed Huglar and Huglarin. The poor powerful idiots. There was silence of a moment, then Lothar said, Demons? In the king's towers? I cannot believe. Oh, believe, said Medivh. No matter how learned or knowledgeable, how wise and wonderful, how powerful and puissant, there's always one more sliver of power, one more bit of knowledge, one more secret to be learned by any mage. I think these two fell into that trap, and called upon the forces from beyond the great dark beyond, and paid the price for it. Idiots. They were friends and colleagues, and they were idiots. But how? Said Lothar. Surely there were to be protections, wards. This is a mystic circle of power. Easily breached, easily broken, said Medivh, leaning over the ring. That's a misspell right there. Leaning over the ring that glimmered with the dried blood of the two mages. He reached down and produced a thin straw that had laid over the cooling stones. Aha! A simple broom straw. If this was here when they began their summonings, all the adjurations and phylacteries in the world would not protect them. The demon would consider the circle to be no more than an ark, a gateway into this world. He would come out, hellfire blazing, and attack the poor fools who brought him into this world. I've seen it before. Khadgar shook his head. The thick darkness that seemed to press in on all sides of him seemed to lift somewhat, and he gathered his wits about him. He looked around the room. It was already a disaster area. The demon had torn everything apart in its assault. If there was a broom straw breaking the circle, then it surely should have been moved elsewhere during the battle. How were the bodies found? Asked Khadgar. What? Said Medivh, with a sharpness that almost made Khadgar jump. I'm sorry, Khadgar responded quickly. You said I should ask questions. Yes, yes, of course, said Medivh, cooling his harsh tone only a notch. To the king's champion he said, Well, Andal and Lothar, how were the bodies found? When I came in, they were on the ground. The servant had not moved them, said Lothar. Face up or face down, sir, said Khadgar, as calmly as he could. He could feel the icy stare of the elder mage. Heads toward the circle or towards the window? Lothar's face clouded in memory. Toward the circle, and face down. Yes, definitely. They were badly scorched all over, and we had to turn them over to make sure it was Huglar and Hugarin. What are you driving at, young trust? Said the mage, now seated by the open window, stroking his beard. Khadgar looked at the two scorched marks between the malfunctioned protective circle and the window, and tried to think of them both as bodies and not think of them as once living mages. If you hit someone from the front, they fall backward. If you hit someone from the back, they fall forward. Was the window open when you arrived? Lothar looked at the open bay window, the great city beyond forgotten for the moment. Yes. No. Yes, I think it was. But it could have been opened by the servants. There was a horrible stench. That's what brought attention to it in the first place. I can ask. No need, said Medivh. The window was likely open when your servant entered. The magus rose and walked to where the scorch marks were. So you think, young trust, he said, that Huglar and Hugarin were standing here, watching the magic circle, and something came in the window and hit them from the back. For effect, he smacked himself against the back of the head with an open palm. They fell forward and were burned in that position. Yes, sir, said Khadgar. I mean, it's a theory. A good one, said Medivh, but wrong, I'm afraid. In the first place, the two mages would be standing there, facing nothing at all, unless they were looking at the magic circle. Therefore, they were summoning a demon. Such a circle would not be used otherwise. But, started Khadgar, and the magus froze his words in his throat with a harsh glance. And, continued Medivh, while that would work with a single attacker, with a zap or a club, it does not function as well for the dark energies of demons. Had the beast breathed fire, it could have caught both men standing, killed them, and only after being set alight, the bodies fell forward. You said the bodies were burned front and back. He put that question to Lothar. Yes, said the king's champion. Medivh held a palm up in front of him. Demon breathes fire, burns the front. Huglar or Hugarin falls forward, flames spread to the back. Unless the demon hit Hugarin or Huglar in the back, they turned them over to make sure the front was burned, then turned them over again. Hardly likely. Demons are not that methodical. Khadgar felt his face warm from embarrassment. I'm sorry. It was just a theory. And a good one, said Medivh quickly. Just an error, that's all. You're right. The window would be open, because that was how the demon left the tower. It is at large in the city right now. Lothar cut a short curse and said, Are you sure? Medivh nodded, completely, but it will probably be laying low for the moment. Even killing two fools like Huglar and Hugarin by surprise would tax any but the most powerful creature's abilities. I can organize search parties within the hour, said Lothar. No, said Medivh. I want to do this myself. No use throwing away good lives after bad. I want to see the remains, of course. That will tell me what we're dealing with here. We moved them to a cool room in the wine cellar, said Lothar. I can take you there. In a moment, said Medivh. I want to look about here for a moment. Will you grant me and my apprentice a moment or 10 alone? Lothar hesitated for a moment, then said, Of course. I will be right outside. As he said the last, he looked at Khadgar sharply, and left. The door's latch clicked shut, and there was silence in the room. Medivh moved from table to table, pawing through the shredded tomes and torn papers. He held up a piece of correspondence with a purple seal and shook his head. Slowly he crumbled the piece of paper in his hands. In civilized countries, he said, his voice slightly strained, apprentices don't disagree with their masters, at least in public. He turned toward Khadgar, and the youth saw the older man's face was a mass of storm clouds. I am sorry, said Khadgar. You said I should ask questions, and the position of the bodies did not seem right at the time. But now that you mention how the bodies were burned... Medivh held up a hand, and Khadgar silenced himself. He paused a moment, then let out a slow exhalation. Enough. You did the right thing. No more or less than asked by me. And if you hadn't spoke up, I wouldn't have realized the demon probably skittered down the tower itself, wasted more time searching the castle complex. But you ask questions because you do not know much about demons, and that is ignorance. And ignorance I will not tolerate. The elder Magus looked at Khadgar, but there was a smile at the corner of his lips. Khadgar, sure that the storm had passed, lowered himself onto a stool. Despite himself, he still said, Lothar will wait, said Medivh, nodding. He waits well, that Anduin Lothar. Now what did you learn of demons in your time at the Violet Citadel? I've heard the legends, Khadgar said. In the first days there were demons in the land, and great heroes arose to drive them out. He thought of the image of Medivh's mother blasting the demons to bits and facing down their lord, but said nothing. No need to make Medivh angry again now that he's calmed down. That's the basics, said Medivh. What we tell the hoi polloi... there was a period there. What we tell the hoi polloi. What do you know in addition? Khadgar took a deep breath. The official teachings in the Violet Citadel, in Kirin Tor, is that demonology is to be eschewed, avoided, and abjured. Any attempt to summon demons are to be found out and stopped at once, and those involved are to be expelled, or worse. There were stories among the young students when I was growing up. Stories grounded in fact, said Medivh. You're a curious lad. You know more, I assume. Khadgar tilted his head and thought, choosing words carefully. Corrigan, our academic librarian, has an extensive collection of materials at his disposal. It needed someone to help organize it, said Medivh dryly. Khadgar must have jumped because Medivh added, That was a guess only, young trust. The materials is mostly folk legends and the reports of the local authorities involving demon worshippers. Most of it was along the lines of individuals committing foul acts in the name of some old demon from the legends or another. Nothing about the actions of truly summoning a demon. No spells, no arcane writings. Khadgar motioned toward the protective circles. No ceremonies. Of course, said Medivh. Even Corrigan would not inflict that on a student. If he has such things, he would keep them separate. From that, the general belief is that when the demons were defeated, they were driven out of this world entirely. They were pushed out of the world of light and living and into their own domain. The great dark beyond, said Medivh, intoning the phrase like a prayer. They are still out there, or so the legend goes, said Khadgar. and they want to come back in. Some say they could Some say they come to the weak-willed in their sleep and urge them to find old spells and make sacrifices. He just called Nerzul weak-minded. Ooh. I mean, that is a direct reference to what he did right there. Alright. Sometimes it's to open the way for them to come back fully. Others say they want worshippers and sacrifices to make this world like it once was, bloody and violent, and only then they would return. Medivh was quiet for a moment, stroking his beard, then said, "Anything else?" "There's more. Details and individual stories. I've seen carvings of demons, pictures, diagrams." Again, Khadgar felt a rising need to tell Medivh about the vision about the demon army. Instead, he said, "And there is that old epic poem, the one about Egwene, fighting a horde of demons in a far-off land." The mention of that brought a gentle, knowing smile to Medivh's face. "Ah, yes, the Song of Egwene. You'll find that poem in a lot of powerful mages' quarters, you know." "My teacher, Lord Guzba, was interested in it," said Khadgar. "Is he now?" said Medivh, smiling. "With all due respect, I don't know if Guzba is quite ready for that poem, at least not in its true form." He peaked his eyebrows. "What you have is basically true. A lot of people couch it in the form of legends and fairy stories, but I think you know as well as I do that demons are real, and are out there, and yes, form a threat to those of us who walk this sunlit world, as well as other worlds. I definitely think, that your Red Sun world was another place, a different world, on the far side of the great dark beyond. The beyond is a prison for these demons, a place without light or succor, and they are very, very jealous, and very, very anxious to get back in." Khadgar nodded, and Medivh continued, "But your assumption that their victims are weak-willed is an error, though again an error that is well-intended. There are more than enough venal harm-hands who evoke a demon force for revenge against a former lover, or stupid merchants who burn an invoice from a debtor with a black handle, badly mangling the ancient name of some once great demonic power. But just as often there are those who walk willingly into the abyss, who feel themselves safe and sure and knowledgeable, that they are beyond any blandishment or threat, that they are powerful enough to harness the demonic energies that surge beyond the walls of the world. They are in many ways even more dangerous than the common rabble, for as you know, a near failure in spellcasting is more deadly than a complete failure." Khadgar could only nod and wondered if Medivh had the power of the mind. But these were powerful mages. Hugler and Hugerin, I mean. "The most powerful in Azeroth," said Medivh. "The wisest and finest wizards. Magical advisors to King Lane himself. Safe, sage, and secured." "Surely they would know better," asked Khadgar. "You would think so," said Medivh. "Yet here we stand in the wreckage of their chambers, and their demon-burned bodies lay in the wine cellar." "Why would they do it, then?" Khadgar knitted his brows, trying not to offend. "If they knew so much, why did they try to summon a demon?" "Many reasons," said Medivh with a sigh. "Hubris, that false pride that goes before the fall. Overconfidence, both in each individually and doubled it for working in tandem. And fear, I suppose, most of all." "Fear?" Khadgar looked at Medivh quizzically. "Fear of the unknown," said Medivh. "Fear of the known, fear things more powerful than they. Khadgar shook his head. What could be more powerful than the two most advanced and learned wizards in Azeroth? Ah, said Medivh, and a smile blossomed beneath his beard. That would be me. They killed themselves summoning a demon, playing with forces best left alone, because they feared me. You? Said Khadgar, the surprise in his voice greater than he had intended. For a moment he feared offending the older mage once more. But Medivh just took a deep breath and blew the air out slowly. Then he said, Me. They were fools, but I blame myself as well. Come, lad, Lothar can wait. It's time I told you the story of the Guardians and of the Order of Tirisfal, which is all that stands between us and the darkness. See, what I like in this is that they're actually bothering to make a lexicon that is something that is central to Azeroth. Instead of using words that we would be using here. Like this, the Great Dark Beyond just means space. The cosmos. That's all it means. But he's saying that demons exist in it. This is basically when they were just starting to try to make their mythos for this world and other worlds. Because they don't mention like old gods. They kind of combine the old gods with the Burning Legion. Like in that whole vision was nothing but like red demons. Which is where they were trying to originally make that good versus evil, the light versus darkness, you know. Very almost Christian-like, but, you know, not quite version on this world. Because we don't have like a sacrificed person to bring redemption. So it's not really Christianity, but it's definitely light against darkness, good versus evil, just black and white kind of thing. Eventually, they started developing a thing where it was more of a cosmos within a cosmos, where we have all of these different other beings are trying to vie for dominance of the Great Dark Beyond and everything in it. So when they were trying to make that into Shadowlands, the expansion, not the Shadowlands that we have known before, where, you know, spirits just end up going to and either reincarnating or having their eternal life or whatever. They keep changing all of that. Yeah, for what I have heard, they were originally trying to have the mythos be more closer to what we know as Christianity, but eventually it doesn't work very well in fantasy. I don't particularly care for it to be in fantasy. I think we already have it here. We don't need to like spread it out onto other worlds kind of thing. You can have your good versus evil, but recently it's been changed to what is really good and what really is evil, and is it really good and evil? Which that I like better. I like a shade of gray than I do absolutes. I think you think more in shades of gray than you do with the absolute. Why they're not... I mean, obviously, the way they're not talking about old gods and the Void Lords and all that is because it hasn't been made yet. There's just demons in the light. So it's kind of not completely the same as it should be, the way we know it now. What we're reading here is where they were starting to establish a more lore-based past life. Even if you've played the game, we're trying to put in all the lore, the history, way things were shaped. And they forget along the way, and then they rewrite over it, and then others who had been following it point out, oh, you missed something, and then they try to correct it. The way the game works right now, especially when you're playing retail, and you jump in, and you just do a bit of chromie time, and then you pop out, yeah, that's what the next generation is going to be like. Because those of us who started playing originally at the beginning in retail, I'm talking about just retail, our tunes at this time are either approaching their 40s or in their 40s. So this is a new generation that's coming in. They haven't been through all this. No, they don't understand what's going on. It's just like when you started playing this game and the lore was just starting to be developed. You don't know what's going on. So now it plays in the standpoint that if you're making a whole new tune, especially if you're just starting out, you've never touched World of Warcraft ever, and you jump in and you do a little bit, and then you go and they say, go talk to Chromie, and you learn a little bit about history, maybe a bit of history that you wanted to know about. You play through it a little bit, and then you jump in to current content, which is the world here and now, with a little bit more history than what you came into this battle for. Makes sense, because then you'd be this brand new 20-year-old jumping in. I mean, it's been a little over 20 years, and then we also had a time jump with our old ass characters going into the Shadowlands. There was a time jump. I don't remember how much it's supposed to be. I think it was only supposed to be 5. I think it's supposed to be 5 years jump. I'd have to confirm that. But it kind of makes sense. But it was already revealed by another person that basically they did this not because it's going to take you forever to get through all these expansions in order to hit current content, but it's to cover up the mistakes that they made along the way, where they were adding lore and then accidentally erasing it and putting in something else. With the changing of hands that you have over 20 years of a game service, maybe longer than that, because, I mean, Warcraft started in the 90s. After all that time, something's going to get lost, and they said they had a Bible for this, they did not. They should have written this stuff down. I mean, we did have the Chronicles books, but that was after the fact that they were already messing up their lore and history as they were going along with each expansion. So, if you want to see what it actually is, that's why we have the classic servers. And every now and then they're going to restart those. As far as I can tell, maybe they'll have a server or two to play through it as it rolls along again. For the next generation of people who want to see what it was way back when. So I don't see Classic going away anytime soon. In fact, I see it rolling a couple of times over a server or two at a time, so that those who have played retail are kind of curious what it was back when, we'll play that. So I don't see classic ever going away. But my voice is fading. My eyes are going crossed, so I don't think I'm going to do another chapter tonight. That's why this part was quite long-winded. How are we doing? Middle of an ad or anything? I don't. No, we're not. Okay, good. Alright, I'm going to end the stream here. Thank you for joining us tonight. I hope you enjoyed it. If you're on Twitch, please consider a follow and hitting that notification button. If you're on YouTube, hit the subscribe button and hit the bell icon so you know that I am streaming at the time. Or if I actually get some time to do it, I will actually put a video together. How about that? Our normal schedule is Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific, on both channels. Usually playing some Warcraft, and then the Storytime Sundays as I can. Depending on my schedule and how tired I am, and all sorts of fun stuff. If you'd like to support the stream, you can do that on Twitch with subscriptions, donations, and bits. If you have Amazon Prime, you have one free subscription, you can hand it over to me and I will take good care of you as we play through this. And maybe we'll play some other video games too. Because eventually there's going to be some breaks in between things. But then there's always classic. And me explaining everything that goes on. So, right now we're not ahead enough on YouTube. We're just getting that launched off, especially with live streams. And YouTube has now put up new restrictions thanks to AI videos. So we need a lot more support on there. More subscriptions. More view time. And maybe we'll get somewhere on there too. But need help on both of those, and these are the best ways to support the stream. There's links below. There's always attending live and then get your subscriptions. You can throw bits at my face, all that kind of stuff. It all helps out in the long run. But anyway, that's it for me here. I get to work in the morning, yay. But at least it's at home. And I need to get my voice to relax. I've been around dust and pollen and all sorts of stuff, and allergies have been a pain recently, so I need to take a break. So thanks again. I hope you enjoyed it. We will see you next time, next Friday, playing some games. Have a good week. We'll see you then. Good night.